Okay. Chapter 4, Music and Migration. I'm Caroline Barron, and this is my Chapter 4 presentation. Introduction. So Chapter 4 analyzes how migration, whether forced, voluntary, or a mix of both, affects the spread and integration of music in various places outside of its origin. When communities migrate from their home, especially in times of hardship, music is one of the few things that can truly survive and be fostered no matter how far a community is driven from their home. These days, because communication and travel is so rapid, the transmission of music to and from so many places is just as rapid as well. Diaspora communities are groups of immigrants living away from their homelands and settling in other places. The concept of home, though many people are not rooted to one place alone, the concept of home remains of premier importance to many. Voluntary migration is pretty much defines people who leave their country voluntarily and seek a better life. They're usually attracted to a location because there's something good there that they don't have where they currently are. Each wave of migration to the United States brought music with them. An example of this is the British migrants who brought ballads, which are strophic songs that tell a story. We saw an example of this in Barbara Allen's British ballad back in chapter 2. And this is an image of the Statue of Liberty in New York City. So the first case study is that of the Chinese migration. Many immigrants from China were voluntarily relocating in the 1800s, and they were attracted by the California Gold Rush or to help build the Transcontinental Railroad. In the mid-19th century of China, political anarchy, famine, and economic crisis were push factors that made many Chinese want to migrate. They were met with extreme discrimination when they arrived in the United States. Many of the Chinese immigrants were determined to keep their traditions and culture as they arrived in America, as they intended to return back home to China once they became prosperous. These migrants were called temporary sojourners. So the next case study, or this is the same case study, it's just part 2. I just have a lot of slides. So I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce this, but the English version is Uncle Ing Comes to the Old Mountain. This is a song sung by Mr. Sheng Chi Ning Ing, a man who migrated to the United States from Taishan County. This song relives the details of Chinese migration through musical performance. Uncle Ing, the subject of the song, migrated to the United States in 1979 and sang about his dreams of becoming prosperous until he died in 2001, maintaining Taishan's tradition of their immigrants feeling connection and responsibility to their homeland and their families that live there. Uncle Ing's Muyu talks about the attractions of the United States and negative circumstances in China that pushed him toward migration. Part 3 of the Chinese migration. Ing Bak Loi Gim San is part of a musical genre called Mukyu, or the way people say it now is Muyu, ranging in length from a few dozen lines to lengthy compositions that can take days to perform. Muyu are transmitted both by oral tradition and written down in songbooks. It is a direct quote from the chapter 4 of the textbook. Muyu is sung by anybody and in various circumstances, and they tell the stories of everyday concerns. They are divided into sections according to the storylines. Muyu have a fixed form, meaning there are 7 syllables per line of text, and they often rhyme. Generally, the text setting is syllabic, but ornaments can be added so that each syllable is prolonged over 3 or more pitches, termed a melismatic setting. In Muyu, 3 linguistic tones can appear at the end of any line of text. Correspondingly, each line can end on one of 3 musical pitches. However, the 5 main divisions of the song end on the same distinctive low pitch, followed by a glissando. And this is an image of a Muyu instrument, Chinese Muyu instrument. So the next case study is the Arab immigration from the Middle East. The first wave of Arab immigrants was motivated to migrate to the United States as a result of political and economic instability in the Middle East in the 19th century. This was a result of the Suez Canal opening in 1869, but the people who migrated in the first wave were not forced to migrate at this time. Many of the immigrants moved as part of extended personal and family networks. So they were pretty much asked to come to the United States for people who were already there and the other way around. And this is called chain migration. The second wave of Arab immigrants were forced to migrate as a result of being dislocated from the Arab-Israeli conflict in 1948. Since people were constantly flowing into the United States, Middle Eastern immigrants kept their connections with their home alive, importing recordings of the latest music and publishing their own. These recordings allowed for the transmission of Arab musical styles to the United States. So this is part 2 of the Arab migration case study. So after World War II, the Lebanese singer Hanan Harouni settled in New York City and brought traditional Lebanese music to the city. Mawal was a song created after Harouni's arrival to New York and included Arab, Muslim, and Christian musicians, as well as the Iraqi-born Jewish violinist named Haki Obadia. This shows the interaction of Middle Eastern musicians of various national and religious backgrounds in the transmission of Arab music. This is also a direct quote from chapter 4. Mawal is a traditional Arab style that alternates sections in free and regular rhythms. In these free rhythm sections, the soloist repeats words and ornaments in the melody, a mode called huzam. The Mawal comments on the pain of migration, which by the mid-20th century was not just an outflow of people, but an ongoing movement back and forth between homeland and diaspora. The song is accompanied by an ensemble that includes the Middle Eastern lute and zither, which are both instruments. Oh, and this is a photo of Hanan Harouni. Okay, so forced migration. Those who are forced to migrate are pushed out of their home by push factors beyond their control. This is often a result of violent or dangerous events and circumstances. An example of this would be the Holocaust in Germany. So there were a lot of people who were trying to leave Germany and Poland and the other countries that were being completely devastated by the Nazis. Another example of this is the mid-19th century mass exodus of the Irish to the United States as a result of the Irish potato famine, also known as the Great Hunger in 1845. Forced migration is an important part of musical study because people who are forced to migrate often maintain their musical traditions to maintain a semblance of home and identity. Conquest and slavery reverberate in the background of American life and musical styles. This is a drawing that represents the situation during the potato famine in Ireland. So the next case study is African forced migrations. So European settlement into the North American colonies and westward expansion entailed forcibly removing millions of Africans from their homes in Africa and putting them through the slave trade to the Caribbean and to the United States and to various other places, but mostly the North America and the Caribbean. Many musical repertoires showed traces of the painful experiences of African Americans during the slave era that followed their forced movement to the United States. Among the most influential of these repertoires is the Black spiritual. Part 2. Slaves who converted to New World Christianity expressed themselves musically through spirituals. In 1867, the first collection of spirituals was published under the title Slave Songs of the United States, which preserved the memory of their music and also romanticized it. The spirituals were originally sung in unison, but may have also, oops, I accidentally clicked that. They were originally sung in unison, but may have also been sung in heterophonic texture or with a soloist and chorus alternating in what is usually termed the call and response style. This musical style was transmitted orally and developed influences from Western classical music. Black spiritual started becoming part of the concert stage in the late 19th century. By the early 20th century, spiritual was transmitted in many different contexts and styles. Part 3. Folk singers learned spirituals through oral tradition and early recordings. Huddie Ledbetter, who sang Nobody Knows, was an example of this. Paul Robeson was a famous interpreter of the classical spiritual. His version of the style includes contrasting tempos, rhythms, and vocal styles, which demonstrated the different channels of transmission within the African American community. The next case study is the Vietnamese migration. The Vietnamese migration in the 1970s and 80s was a result of the Vietnam War conflict, which was obviously, as we all know, an extremely devastating conflict. The first wave consisted of the urban elite who settled in DC, New York City, New Jersey, and California. The second wave of immigrants consisted of less educated fishermen and farmers who often ended up in refugee camps in the Philippines and elsewhere. Over time, people filtered through camps and into the United States. The Vietnamese in North America often speak Vietnamese and observe Vietnamese holidays like Tet in order to preserve their tradition. The festivities that are a part of Tet involve a wide range of musical styles, dances, and fashion. Traditional Vietnamese music is performed in diaspora communities by residents who maintain their musical traditions. Troops of musicians from Vietnam occasionally visit the Vietnamese diaspora communities in America, such as the Perfume River Traditional Ensemble from Central Vietnam. They perform court, chamber, and folk music of the Central Vietnam area. Chamber music, performed for connoisseurs. Chamber begins with a long section in free rhythm and then a section with regular rhythm based on an 8-beat cycle. Part 2. The Dan bao is a musical instrument known as a monochord. It consists of a single string, resonating chamber, and a bamboo shaft. Legends say that this instrument can imitate all sounds, including a human voice. It represents the spirit of solidarity and kinship between two ethnic groups, Kin and Muong. Surprisingly, there was a significant presence of traditional Vietnamese music within refugee camps. Buddhist chants, Vietnamese folk and chamber music, and Western and popular and classical music. The Western performances were usually public, and the others, like the Vietnamese music and the Buddhist chanting, were private. The people in the camp sang love songs and sad songs, which had been banned in their home country. So this was an expression of political ideology. And this is an image of a Dan bao, the instrument. So this is my conclusion. To this day, forced and voluntary migration continues to impact the spread and transmission of traditional music from various cultures. The experience of migration, for those who have had it, never really goes away. People must rebuild their lives and existences, and holding onto the music they know and love from their culture is an integral part of that process. And this is my works cited. Thank you.